I need you to understand something about the kind of person who drills through a shared wall to steal their neighbor's internet connection. This is not someone who forgot to pay their bill. This is not someone in a desperate situation making a temporary bad choice with full awareness that it is a bad choice. This is someone who has made a series of deliberate decisions to identify the wall, to obtain a drill, to select a drill bit appropriate for the material, to plan a time when the neighbor would not notice, to execute the drilling, to thread a cable through the hole, to connect the cable to a device, and to continue using the stolen connection for an extended period, and who has made all of these decisions without once arriving at the thought that what they are doing is wrong. Or perhaps more accurately, who has arrived at that thought and dismissed it because the convenience of the outcome outweighed any concern about the ethics of the process. That is who lived on the other side of my wall for 2 years. Her name was Denise Kramer. She was in her mid-40s, a divorcee who had moved into the adjacent unit of our duplex approximately 8 months before I discovered what she had done. We shared a wall, the full interior wall that ran the length of both units of the duplex, floor to ceiling, from the front of the building to the rear. On my side of that wall, I had my living room, my home office, my bedroom. On her side, she had her corresponding spaces. The wall between us was standard residential construction, drywall on wood framing, with the usual cavity in between for insulation, and, in the relevant sections, the wiring that served each unit. My side of the wall also had, in my home office section, a wireless router. Not an unusual router, a standard consumer-grade unit that I had set up when I moved into the unit 3 years before Denise arrived, connected to the internet service I paid for through a monthly subscription to the local cable company. The router was mounted on a small shelf on the wall between my desk and the shared interior wall, which meant it was perhaps 18 inches from the shared wall, which meant its signal was strong on both sides of that wall, which was not something I had thought about when I mounted it there because I had not yet lived next to Denise Kramer. I discovered the situation through a combination of circumstances that I will describe in the order they occurred, because the order is important, and because the discovery itself was a process that took several weeks from first noticing something was wrong to understanding what was wrong to confirming it completely. My name is Aaron Whitfield. I am 35 years old. I am a network security professional. I have been working in network security for 11 years, the last 7 in a senior role at a cybersecurity firm where my specific expertise is in network intrusion detection, unauthorized access identification, and the forensic analysis of how and when and by whom network systems have been accessed without permission. I mention this not to establish myself as a technical genius. I am competent at my job, not exceptional, and many people in my field would have found the situation I am about to describe routine. But because it explains why, when something was wrong with my network, I had both the tools and the training to find out exactly what it was. In the spring of my 3rd year in the duplex, 8 months after Denise moved in next door, I began noticing anomalies in my network traffic. Not dramatic anomalies, subtle ones, the kind of thing that most people would not notice and that even technically informed people might dismiss as normal variation in a home network, slightly higher than expected bandwidth usage at certain times of day, occasional latency spikes in the early evening, a pattern of data consumption that did not fully match my own usage habits. I noticed these things the way I notice things professionally, not as alarms, but as data points that were slightly off the expected pattern and that deserved tracking before they deserved conclusions. I set up a more detailed monitoring system on my home network, which was something I had the tools to do and which I probably should have had in place from the beginning simply as a matter of professional habit. The monitoring logged every device that connected to my network, every data transfer, every access timestamp, everything. What the monitoring showed me over the following 3 weeks was that my network had a device on it that I did not recognize. The device appeared on the network at irregular intervals, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening, sometimes for several hours at a stretch. It was not my phone, my laptop, my tablet, my smart TV, my work computer, or any other device I owned or had ever connected to my network. It was a device with a MAC address I did not recognize, connecting to my network with valid credentials. Valid credentials, meaning it had my Wi-Fi password. I changed my Wi-Fi password immediately when I confirmed this. The unknown device dropped off the network. I thought the matter was resolved. 2 weeks later, the device was back on my network. The new password had been obtained somehow. I thought about how this was possible. The most likely explanations were that someone had seen me enter the password on a device, or that the password had been obtained through some form of technical interception, or that someone had accessed my router's administrative interface and read the password from there. I reviewed my router logs. The administrative interface had been accessed from a device I did not recognize, from inside my local network, approximately 10 days after I had changed the password. The unknown device had, at some point, accessed my router's admin panel, which I had left with default administrative credentials, a rookie mistake I will not make again, and had read the current password. I locked down the router administrative credentials. I changed the password again. I changed the network name. I set up a monitoring alert that would notify me immediately if any device I did not recognize connected to my network. The monitoring alert went off 3 days later. At this point, I understood several things. First, someone had persistent, determined access to my network and had found a way to restore that access twice after I attempted to close it. Second, that someone was clearly close enough to my router to maintain a strong enough signal to connect reliably. Third, the access was not opportunistic or accidental. It was organized and intentional. Someone was specifically trying to use my internet connection and was willing to put real effort into maintaining that access after it was disrupted. The question was how they were doing it technically, and more specifically from where. The signal strength data from my monitoring was the key. Every time the unknown device connected, the monitoring logged the signal strength of the connection, how strong the signal was from my router to the device. The signal strength was extremely high. Consistently, across every connection event, the signal between my router and the unknown device was at near maximum strength. In a home network, this typically means the device is in the same room as the router or immediately adjacent. My router was in my home office. My home office shared a wall with Denise's unit. The unknown device, based on signal strength, was almost certainly in the space immediately on the other side of that wall. I needed physical confirmation. I needed to know if there was a wired connection running through the shared wall, a cable that connected a device in Denise's unit directly to something in my unit, which would explain both the proximity and the reliability of the connection. A direct cable connection would give a signal strength reading that looked like being in the same room, because effectively the device would be on the same physical network segment regardless of the wall between them. I looked at my wall carefully. The shared interior wall in my home office had, I realized when I looked at it for the first time with this specific question in mind, a small imperfection near the baseboard, a slightly irregular area of drywall, perhaps 2 inches in diameter, that had been patched with spackling compound at some point. The patch was not fresh. It had been painted over and matched the wall color closely enough that I had never noticed it. But now that I was looking, it was visible. Someone had repaired a hole in the wall near the baseboard. I probed the patch gently. The spackling compound was not as solid as it looked. There was a void behind it. I cleared the patch carefully and found a hole, approximately 3/4 of an inch in diameter, drilled cleanly through the drywall and the framing cavity. Running through the hole, sealed around with the spackling compound on my side, was a network cable. A standard Category 6 Ethernet cable, the kind you buy at any electronics store, running from somewhere in my home office through the wall into Denise's unit. I followed the cable on my side. It ran along the baseboard, tucked under the edge of my carpet, for about 4 feet to a small network switch, a 5-port device, smaller than a paperback book, that was plugged into the wall behind my bookshelf. The switch was connected to my router via one of the ports. The cable through the wall was connected to another port. My router was providing internet to whatever device was connected to the other end of the cable in Denise's unit. I sat on the floor of my home office for a moment, looking at this arrangement. Then I took photographs. Detailed, well-lit, clearly focused photographs of every element of what I had found: the hole in the wall, the cable, the network switch, the connection to my router, the cable routing under the carpet. I photographed the spackling compound on both the visible surface and the interior of the hole. I photographed the network switch's make and model and serial number. Then I called the police. The officer who responded was a young man named Officer Torres, who listened to my explanation carefully and who, to his credit, understood the technical aspects well enough to grasp what had happened without needing extensive explanation. He confirmed the physical setup. He photographed everything himself. He ran the serial number on the network switch, which was a dead end. It was a consumer product with no meaningful tracking. He said what had occurred was unauthorized access to a computer network, which was a crime under both state law and federal law, specifically the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. He said he was going to knock on Denise's door. I was not present for that conversation. I was in my unit, hearing muffled sounds from next door. The conversation lasted approximately 20 minutes. Officer Torres came back and said Denise had admitted to drilling the hole and running the cable. She had said she had noticed my Wi-Fi signal was strong in her unit and had decided to connect to it more directly to improve the reliability. She had said she had not thought it was a serious matter. Officer Torres said he had explained to her that it was, in fact, a serious matter, specifically that it was a federal crime, and that he was issuing a formal warning and initiating a case file, and that if the unauthorized access continued, she would be charged. He asked me what I wanted to do with the cable and the switch. I said I wanted the cable removed from my property immediately. He knocked on Denise's door again and conveyed this. A few minutes later, from the baseboard of my home office, the cable twitched and then slowly retracted back through the hole as Denise pulled it from her side. I documented this too, because I document everything. Then I filled the hole with proper patching compound and repainted it, and it was gone. Officer Torres left. I sat in my home office and thought about the situation. The criminal matter had been addressed technically. A formal warning had been issued. The cable had been removed. My network was clean. I changed my password again and set up proper administrative security, and the unknown device never appeared on my network again. But here is the thing that I kept thinking about, sitting in my home office the evening after Officer Torres left. Denise had drilled through my wall. She had run a cable through my wall. She had installed a network switch in my space without my knowledge. She had accessed my router's administrative interface. She had stolen my internet connection for months, and when confronted, she had said she had not thought it was a serious matter. She had not thought it was a serious matter. I have a very particular relationship with the phrase "not a serious matter" when it is applied to someone accessing a network without authorization. I spend my professional life explaining to organizations why unauthorized network access is extremely serious, why it creates liability, why it exposes sensitive data, why it is the entry point for attacks that cost organizations millions of dollars. I have sat in boardrooms and explained patiently why the thing that someone thought was not a serious matter turned out to be the most serious matter the organization had ever faced. The phrase "not a serious matter" in the context of unauthorized network access is something I have a visceral reaction to. I was also thinking about something else. Denise had stolen my internet for months. She had not paid for internet service of her own during that period. I was, by implication, paying for her internet in addition to mine. She had not apologized. She had expressed, through the framing of her admission, a perspective that characterized my objection as the unusual thing rather than her conduct. She had been warned by a police officer. And she was still, as of that evening, living on the other side of my wall. I wanted to do something, not something harmful, not something illegal, something proportionate and creative and technically interesting, and that, when I eventually told the story to people, would make them laugh and understand simultaneously. I started thinking about what I knew about networks and what options were available to a network security professional with full administrative access to his own router. I thought about it for 4 days. On the fifth day, I had the plan. Let me explain the technical background first, because the execution depends on understanding it, and because the technical elegance of what I set up is something I am genuinely proud of from a purely professional standpoint. My router, like most modern consumer routers, had the ability to broadcast multiple separate wireless networks simultaneously, what the industry calls SSIDs. Most people use one network with one name. My router could support up to 4 separate network names, each with its own password, each potentially with its own settings and restrictions. This was a feature I had used professionally in home network setups, but had never deployed in my own home because I had no particular need for it. I also had, from my professional toolkit, a piece of software called a network traffic shaper, a tool that allowed me to intercept traffic on a network segment and substitute different content for what was being requested. Traffic shapers are used legitimately in enterprise networks all the time, for purposes ranging from content filtering to bandwidth management to security monitoring. They are powerful and flexible, and in the hands of someone who knows what they are doing, capable of producing very specific effects on the network experience of the devices they govern. The plan had 2 parts. The first part was to set up a second wireless network with a name that was slightly, but not immediately obviously different from my legitimate network. Something like a network named Crestview Homes that had a slightly different name, Crestview Home without the S, or Crestview Homes with a space. The kind of difference that a person connecting from next door might not notice if they were not looking carefully. The second network would look, from outside, like a legitimate Wi-Fi network. It would connect devices. It would appear to provide internet access. What it would actually provide was something I was going to arrange very carefully. The second part of the plan involved a small audio file and the traffic shaper. I want to be clear about what I chose and why I chose it, because the choice is important and because it was not arbitrary. I could have played any sound through the traffic shaper. I could have played static or a dial-up modem screech or silence or anything else. What I chose was goats. Specifically, a 4-minute audio loop of screaming goats, the particular vocalization that goats produce when they are startled or excited, which is remarkable for being simultaneously extremely loud, extremely high-pitched, and somehow impossibly human-sounding in a way that the brain cannot fully process as animal noise. Screaming goat videos had been a popular internet phenomenon for years at the point when this happened, and the audio was freely available and thoroughly delightful in the specific way that absurdity is delightful. I chose goats because the goat scream has a quality that other audio does not have. It is startling but not alarming in a safety sense. It is impossible to ignore. It is immediately recognizable as something ridiculous rather than something threatening. And it is, once you have heard it, impossible to unhear. The sound lodges in your memory in a way that makes you think about it for days afterward. I wanted Denise, every time she connected to the DK network, to hear goats. I wanted the goats to be the first thing she experienced when she tried to use what she thought was the internet. I wanted the association between unauthorized network access and goats screaming to become, in her nervous system, permanent. I set up the DK network on a Sunday afternoon. It took about 3 hours of careful configuration work. I named it something close enough to my legitimate network to be plausible. I set it up with no password, which meant any device could connect to it without needing credentials. I configured the traffic shaper to intercept any HTTP or HTTPS traffic from devices on the DK network and serve, instead of the requested content, a response that played the goat audio file on loop. Browser requests for websites would get goat screams. App connections would get goat screams. Any attempt to use the internet on the DK network would, instead of internet, get goats. I turned on the DK network and went to make dinner. I did not know if Denise would connect to it. I did not know if she had set up her own internet service in the weeks since the cable was removed. I did not know if she would notice the DK network at all. I had set it up as a contingency, a trap that was baited and waiting, and I was prepared for the possibility that it caught nothing. It caught something in approximately 40 minutes. My monitoring showed a device connect to the DK network at 6:47 p.m. The device had a MAC address that I checked against my records. It was the same device that had been on my legitimate network for months before I found the cable. It was Denise's device. She had found the open network, she had connected to it, and she was now attempting to use the internet, and what she was getting instead of the internet was 4 minutes of screaming goats on an infinite loop. I sat in my home office and looked at the monitoring dashboard and allowed myself a moment of professional satisfaction. I want to be clear once again about what it was and what it was not, because clarity matters. The DK network was an open wireless network that I was broadcasting from my own router in my own home. It was not on Denise's property. It was not in her unit. It was not connected to her equipment without her consent. It was a signal I was broadcasting from my side of the wall that she was choosing to connect to. She was not required to connect to it. She chose to connect to it because she saw an open network and wanted free internet, and what she got instead of free internet was goats, because that is what I had configured the network to provide. This is legally an interesting area. Deborah Chai, when I consulted her about it, I had taken to consulting Deborah about neighbor situations after the positive experience described elsewhere, said the DK network itself was not clearly illegal, but that operating it for an extended period with the specific intent to deceive a particular person could attract argument about deceptive practices. She recommended a time limit and said 10 to 14 days was probably a defensible period, and that beyond that I should convert the network to something inert, either take it down or change it to genuinely provide nothing rather than actively serve GOAT audio. I took the network down after 11 days, slightly ahead of the 14-day outer limit Deborah had suggested. In those 11 days, Denise's device connected to the DK network on 23 separate occasions. I know this because the monitoring logged every connection event. The connections ranged from brief, under a minute, presumably the GOAT audio playing and Denise immediately disconnecting, to one connection that lasted 11 minutes before disconnecting, which I have imagined many times and which, in my imagination, involves Denise sitting at her computer trying multiple different approaches to make the internet work and getting goats each time she tries. On the third day of the DK network's operation, I heard, clearly through the shared wall, a sound that I initially could not identify. It was brief, 3 or 4 seconds, muffled by the wall, and it took me a moment to recognize it because I had not expected to hear it from that direction. It was a goat scream. Faint and muffled, but unmistakable to someone who had spent the previous 3 days listening to the audio file repeatedly in the process of configuring and testing the network. Denise had connected to the DK network, and her speakers had been on, and the GOAT audio had played, and I had heard it through the wall. I am not going to pretend I did not find this extremely funny. I found it extremely funny. I found it funny in the way that the universe finding a sense of proportion is always funny, not cruel, not malicious, but genuinely, perfectly appropriate to the situation. On the 7th day, I heard it again, this time slightly longer, maybe 10 seconds of muffled goat before it stopped. I chose to interpret this as Denise having connected again despite the previous experiences, which meant either she had not connected the network to the GOAT audio or she was hoping the problem had resolved. Or possibly she was testing it methodically, as a person trying to troubleshoot a network problem would. On the 9th day, something happened that I had not anticipated and that I want to describe carefully because it is the part of the story that is most surprising. There was a knock on my door. It was Denise. I opened the door. She was standing on my porch with the particular expression of someone who has been thinking about something for a while and has decided to address it directly. She said she wanted to talk to me about the internet situation. I said I was happy to talk. She said she knew I was probably still angry about what she had done with the cable and the drilling and the network access, and that she understood why and that she was sorry. She said sorry specifically, not that she had not realized it was serious or that she had not meant any harm, but sorry, a direct apology without qualification. I noted this. It was different from her conversation with Officer Torres. She also said she had been trying to use the open network she had found on her phone, and that every time she connected to it, she got a sound that she could not explain, and that she thought there might be something wrong with the network and wanted to know if it was mine, and if I knew what was wrong with it. I considered this question for a moment. Then I said yes, it was my network. I said I had set it up as a test network for some professional work I was doing, and that the audio it served was part of the test configuration. I said I was going to be taking it down in the next few days when the test was complete. I said she was welcome to use it in the meantime if she wanted, but that the audio was part of the test and would not stop until the test was complete. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said she thought she might just get her own internet service. I said that sounded like a good plan and that I could recommend the local cable provider, which had reasonable rates for a single-unit residential connection. She said she appreciated that and thanked me for talking to her. She left. I took the DK network down 2 days later, slightly ahead of schedule, because the purpose had been served. Not the GOAT purpose, though the GOAT purpose had been served too, but the underlying purpose, which was to make clear that unauthorized access to my network was not going to produce the internet and was going to produce something else instead, and that something else was going to continue until Denise made different choices. The different choice she made was to get her own internet service, which she apparently did within a week of our porch conversation. I know this because I stopped seeing her device connect to my DK network, which was already down, and because 3 weeks later I saw a cable company truck outside her unit for about 2 hours, which typically indicates a new service installation. She has had her own internet service for the 3 years since this happened. Her device has never appeared on my network in any form. The hole in the shared wall has been my repair, and her side has presumably also been repaired, though I cannot confirm this without going through the wall again, which I have no interest in doing. I told the story to colleagues at work approximately a month after it concluded, at a team lunch where we were sharing network security anecdotes, a genre of story that network security professionals have a surprisingly deep catalog of. The story was received enthusiastically. A colleague named James said the GOAT configuration was genuinely clever from a technical standpoint and asked several questions about the specific traffic shaper implementation that I was happy to answer. Another colleague named Rebecca said she had dealt with a similar situation in a shared office space and wished she had thought of the GOAT approach. Our department head said it was the best use of professional skills for personal purposes she had heard of in a long time. I told it on an internet forum about a year after it happened, in a thread about neighbor disputes and creative resolutions. The response was similar to the work lunch, enthusiastic, technically interested, with several people asking specific questions about the implementation. A few people raised the legal question, which I addressed by explaining Deborah's analysis and the time-limited nature of the DK network. The thread got a significant number of upvotes, and the GOAT aspect was, by a wide margin, the most commented upon element. One commenter said they could not decide whether the GOATs were the point or whether the legal and technical framework was the point. I thought about this for a while and then replied that they were both the point. The legal and technical framework was the foundation that made everything defensible and clean. The GOATs were the expression, the specific, absurd, perfectly calibrated response to the specific, absurd, perfectly entitled behavior that had preceded it. Without the legal foundation, the GOATs were just mischief. Without the GOATs, the legal foundation was just a document. Together, they were something complete, something that addressed the situation at every level, the formal level, the practical level, and the deeply human level at which a person who drills through a wall to steal internet and says it is not a serious matter needs to hear screaming goats every single time they try to do it. I want to end with the technical lesson and the human lesson because both are real and both are worth stating. The technical lesson is one I have given to clients professionally but had not previously had occasion to apply personally. Home networks are not secure by default. The consumer router that most people buy, set up once, and forget about is a device with significant security exposure that most people never think about. Default administrative credentials, unchanged passwords, no device monitoring, no access logging. These are standard features of home network setups that represent real vulnerability. After this experience, I wrote an internal document at my firm called Home Network Security for Humans, a non-technical guide to the basic steps that a non-expert homeowner can take to meaningfully improve their home network security. It has been shared internally several hundred times, and I have made it available externally. I'm not going to reproduce it here, but the core message is this: know what is on your network, log what connects to it, change default credentials, and check it periodically. These 4 things, consistently done, would have meant I noticed Denise's access much earlier and with less effort. The human lesson is harder to state precisely, but I will try. It is about the specific quality of response that a particular kind of provocation deserves. Denise had done something technical in nature. She had accessed my network through a technical means, and the response that felt most natural to the situation was also technical in nature. Not because technical responses are always the right ones, but because in this specific case, the symmetry was both satisfying and instructive. She had used a cable and a drill and a router to access something that was mine. I had used a router configuration and an audio file to respond to her attempt to do it again. The tools were the same category. The intent was different. Mine was to demonstrate a consequence, not to steal anything, not to damage anything, not to access anything that did not belong to me. But the technical language was shared, and the response that Denise heard through her speakers, the screaming goat audio serving in place of the internet she thought she was accessing, was in a very real sense a message written in a language she understood, because she had demonstrated she understood it. The message was, this network is administered by someone who knows exactly what is on it, who knew exactly what you were doing, and who is capable of making your experience of unauthorized access considerably more entertaining than you find it. I do not think Denise needed all 11 days of the DK network to receive the message. I think she received it clearly on the first day when she connected and got goats. I think the 7 subsequent reconnections were the behavior of a person who has received an unexpected message and keeps trying to find the version of the situation in which the message does not apply. The message kept applying. The goats kept screaming. She got her own internet service. The message had been received. My network is clean. The wall between my unit and Denise's is intact and unpierced. My router logs show only devices I recognize and have authorized. The monitoring is still in place, as it should have been from the beginning, because knowing what is on your network is simply good practice regardless of your neighbors. Denise and I are not friendly. We are not unfriendly. We are 2 people who live on opposite sides of a wall and who have reached, through a sequence of events that included a drill and a cable and a police visit and 11 days of screaming goats, a stable equilibrium in which she does not access my network, and I do not need to think about what she is doing with hers. This is the correct relationship between people who share a wall and nothing else. It is a relationship of parallel existence rather than connection, which is, given the specific history of how the connection between us was previously managed, exactly what we both want. The GOAT audio file is still on my hard drive. I have no plans to use it again, but I have not deleted it because certain things deserve to be kept simply as a record of a moment when the response and the provocation were exactly matched, when the universe's rough sense of proportion expressed itself with unusual precision, and when the sound of screaming goats was the most perfectly appropriate sound in the world. Thumbnail text. Line 1, my neighbor drilled through our shared wall to steal my Wi-Fi, so I set up a network that gave her non-stop goat screams instead goat. Line 2, she connected 23 times in 11 days, and I heard the goats through the wall every single time face antenna.